I need you to lock in for the next few minutes, because what I am about to show you isn't about the battlefield maps or the drone footage everyone else is covering.
We must hold this line.
This is about a structural rot happening underneath the war that the Kremlin has finally been forced to admit out loud. We are looking at economic fingerprints that map so precisely onto the Soviet collapse of 1991 that historians are struggling to find any meaningful differences. Here is the number that starts this story. Russia's GDP growth collapsed from 4.3% in 2024 to just 1% in 2025. A 76% drop in a single year. While Vladimir Putin calls this a managed cooling, history has heard that exact sentence before. In the 1970s, Brezhnev's economists said the same thing as the Soviet system began its terminal decline. They said everything was under control. History proved otherwise. The mechanism, the two-tier economy. To understand why this is happening, you need to understand the mechanism of a war economy. It follows a predictable, deadly sequence. First, military spending floods the system with money. Soldiers get salaries, factories get contracts, and GDP looks like it's booming. But then, the side effects hit. Inflation spikes, forcing the central bank to raise interest rates to levels that strangle the civilian sector. Right now, Russia is trapped in the third phase of this cycle. Defense and security spending now consume 40% of the entire federal budget. To put that in perspective, the last time a Russian government spent that much on the military was during the height of the Cold War. Today, the military economy and the civilian economy have split into two separate realities. While weapons manufacturing grows, every other sector, transport, construction, coal, and gas, is being crushed by a 16% interest rate. For a normal business, that isn't a headwind. It's a wall. The data, the evaporating cushion. The official narrative claims resilience, but the internal math tells a different story. Russia has been forced to raise its corporate profit tax from 20% to 25% and hike VAT to 22%. Regional subsidies have been cut for 3 years straight, and even military sign-up bonuses are being slashed because local budgets are simply empty. The biggest blow? The oil cushion is disappearing. Oil and gas revenues in January of this year were half of what they were just 1 year ago. Russia built its entire wartime survival plan on oil prices that are now projected to fall. This is the exact trap the Soviet Union fell into in the mid-1980s. A massive military budget, a stagnant civilian sector, and a sudden collapse in oil prices that left the government with no way to pay its bills. The human cost. The checkout counter reality. The Kremlin can manipulate GDP figures, but it cannot hide the prices at the grocery store. This is where the lived reality breaks the official reality. In the agricultural heartlands like Volgograd, cucumber prices jumped nearly 38% in the first 2 weeks of this year alone. Bread is up 15%, tomatoes are up 25%, and potatoes are up 11%. These aren't the signs of a managed cooling. These are the signs of a system under genuine terminal stress. The greatest losers here aren't the oligarchs, but Putin's core base, teachers, doctors, and pensioners. Their wages are tied to an official inflation rate of 9%, while their actual household costs are rising by over 20%. When that gap stays wide for too long, people stop believing in the institutions that created it. The debt spiral and infrastructure. Russia is now entering a debt spiral. By 2026, the cost of servicing government debt will consume nearly 9% of all federal spending. Because of sanctions, Russia cannot borrow from the West, and even attempts to borrow in Chinese yuan have failed because the terms were unworkable. They are forced to borrow domestically at rates above 15%, which only makes the deficit grow faster. What makes this even more fragile than 1991 is the loss of physical infrastructure. The Soviet Union collapsed with its factories and railways intact. Today, Russia is burning through that inherited hardware in Ukraine at a rate that will take decades to recover from. The technical expertise and the productive male population being consumed by the war are invisible costs that don't show up in a GDP number today, but will surface all at once when the bill finally arrives. The three paths. How it ends. History suggests three possible paths from here. 1. The negotiated end. Ironically, a sudden end to the war would trigger a massive recession as the military-industrial sector, the only thing growing, suddenly contracts. 2. The oil miracle. Putin is betting on oil prices recovering to buy more time, just as his predecessors did in 1985 before the market collapsed anyway. 3. The default. The government keeps spending, the central bank prints money to cover the deficit, and inflation explodes beyond control, leading to a repeat of the 1990s where savings were destroyed in months. The Soviet Union looked stable in 1989. By 1991, it was gone. The buffers are real, and Russia isn't collapsing tomorrow, but the structural math is already written. Closing question. Knowing that these economic fingerprints map almost perfectly onto the final decade of the Soviet Union, do you think the outcome will be different this time? Or does history win again? Tell me what you think in the comments. Share this with someone who thinks this story is only happening on the battlefield, because the economic story is the one that determines how it actually ends. The data is public. The pattern is documented. The only question is whether you're looking at it clearly.